book of Revelation, the most controversial book of the Bible. Within its pages, a dire forecast of apocalypse. Is Revelation prophecy a vision of things to come, or history that's come and gone? The answer is locked in the book's cryptic words. Are they a code waiting to be cracked, or a riddle never to be solved? What's the real secret of the book of Revelation? On an ancient battlefield in the Holy Land, the forces of good and evil face off. A sinister figure leads the army of darkness. This is the site of mankind's final battle. A place with a bone-chilling name: Armageddon. This scenario comes not from Hollywood, but the book of Revelation, the final chapter of the Bible. 2,000 years after it was written, a different battle rages over what it means.
Hands down, it's the most controversial book in the Bible.
To some evangelical Christians, Revelation outlines a doomsday scenario known as the end times. And they say it's unfolding before our eyes.
There is enough going on in the world related to Bible prophecy that I write a daily column. I have for 4 years, every single morning, on something to do with what's going on in the news and how it relates to Bible prophecy.
Obviously, if you're considering the horrible times that are going to come upon this world, you want to let people know what is headed in the future and how to be prepared. God is telling history before it actually happens.
Most scholars say Revelation is a product of its time.
Apocalyptic texts address the issues of their own age, so that the New Testament apocalypse addresses Roman issues. It's about the Roman world and the difficulties in the Roman world and the hope that Christians can have in the midst of persecution in that Roman world.
It's not supposed to be understood as something literal. It's supposed to be taken symbolically.
Symbols abound in Revelation. So does confusion.
It is like a dream in the sense that we have lots of images that make no sense. They're not coherent in some ways. If you read the book of Revelation, you come across great monsters that emerge from the sea, and the red dragon, a messianic warrior, all kinds of plagues that come about.
The author of Revelation speaks of 7 seals, of bowls full of God's wrath, of a great harlot who rides a scarlet beast. What does Revelation really mean? To decipher a book that may foretell the future, you have to revisit the past. The last book of the Bible was written toward the end of the 1st century AD.
That Jesus brings.
It circulated throughout Asia Minor as a letter to early Christians. It's called the Revealing, or the Revelation. But it's often known by the original Greek translation of that word, Apocalypse. The author calls himself John. Early Christians believed he was John the Apostle. John was a fisherman in Judea until he met Jesus of Nazareth. John was among the first apostles chosen by Jesus. He became so close to Jesus that he was known as the beloved disciple. When Jesus was crucified, John was the only apostle to remain as a witness. Step by step, the author of Revelation outlines a vision of apocalypse. For 7 years, catastrophe will rock the planet. Quakes from below. And fire from the sky above. Then, a charismatic madman rises to power. He forces every man, woman, and child to accept his mark. 666. Through this numbering system, he controls mankind and rules the world. John calls him the Beast. Believers call him the Antichrist.
And it's unlikely we'll know who he is at first. I believe he's alive today.
Adherents of this apocalypse scenario believe they know how it will unfold. At the peak of his powers, he launches a final battle between good and evil. Armageddon. Most of the Earth's population will die. The end of the world as we know it. To some fundamentalist Christians, this scenario isn't open to interpretation. It's a forecast, a prediction of the inevitable. They base their beliefs on not only Revelation, but select passages from the Old Testament.
Almost 27% of the entire Bible is prophetic in nature. Personally, I don't see how you would interpret the Bible any other way but literally. It makes sense that if God gives his word to us, that he would give it to us in a way that we can understand.
Most Christian theologians read Scripture less literally.
There's a lot of piecing together and interpreting. It's good to recognize that that's what's being done, and sometimes the interpretations are really vigorous and don't have so much to do with the original text.
Popular culture sees Revelation as having to do with some sort of catastrophic end-time event. They see Revelation as predicting the future, whereas scholarship sees Revelation as being addressed to its own circumstances, a call to faithfulness for those early Christians who were living in Asia Minor in the late 1st century.
Not so, say many literalists. They cite another book of the Bible, where Jesus himself warns of doomsday, the Gospel of Matthew. The disciples came unto him, saying, What shall be the sign of thy coming, and the end of the world? And Jesus answered, Ye shall hear of wars and rumors of war. There shall be famines, and pestilences, and earthquakes in diverse places. When ye see all these things, know that it is near. Matthew chapter 24, verse 3 to 33. Christians who take Revelation as prophecy seek confirmation in today's headlines. Catastrophic weather patterns. Terrifying new plagues. Horrific natural disasters. And deadly madmen, armed with new weapons of destruction. This is the stuff of Revelation.
With the events that are taking place in the world today, I very much believe that we're seeing the stage being set for the fulfillment of Bible prophecy.
Others say the stage is always set. War, famine, plague, and disaster are constants through time. Believers say, this time, it's real. That the clock is ticking, that the countdown has begun. Come 0 hour, the apocalypse begins. It starts with a phenomenon straight out of science fiction. The rapture.
Toyota are sponsors of green design.
These textiles are made in a factory, yet their whole life cycle is pollution-free. Lothar Pfister and his team here in Switzerland have changed the way they produce. They start with natural raw materials and chemicals that are harmless, so the workforce no longer needs protective clothing. The dyeing and finishing processes are so safe and so clean that the water leaving the factory is pure enough to drink. In fact, the only waste produced is biodegradable, which is much appreciated by the local gardeners who use it as fertilizer. Whilst the textiles produced are still just as comfortable, colourful and hard-wearing.
Green design, sponsored by Toyota, aiming for zero emissions.
Bosbouw breekt beleggerswereld open! Bosbouw breekt beleggerswereld open!
Hou maar op nu. Ik denk dat Wall Street het nu wel weet.
En ik heb het heet! Het gaat erom dat ook Nederlandse beleggers begrijpen hoe bijzonder dit postbankaanbod is.
De beleggerswereld ligt bij je voeten Wall Street. Wat dacht je op? Luister jij maar wel, Lisa.
Koffie erbij graag, hè? Vanaf nu,
Juist.
op dit moment, kan iedere belegger via internet automatisch een aan- en verkoopadvies krijgen.
Ja, dat snap ik. Zoveel meer transacties, des te meer zo'n bank eraan verdient natuurlijk. Kom nou.
Nee Jan, de postbank rekent hiervoor geen transactiekosten.
Dus wij mogen hier spreken van een doorbraak. Zo wil je maar zo vertellen.
En elke Nederlander heeft nu toegang tot professioneel advies.
Dat zal je trouwens professioneel spreken.
Ja.
Doe dat pak uit. Let's go downtown.
Grande Punto Logic Automaat. House of Knowledge presenteert de schitterende DVD-collectie De Da Vinci Files. 4 films, een miniserie en 5 documentaires op 10 DVD's. Stap in de wereld van de Da Vinci Code en ontdek de geheimen van het mysterie. Bij deze box ontvangt u bovendien de bioscoopfilm De Da Vinci Code geheel gratis. Ruim 17 uur spraakmakende films en fascinerende documentaires. Zoals Opus Dei en de Da Vinci...
addresses the issues of that world.
In the first century, Rome was the enemy of Christianity. The biggest enemy of all was the Emperor Nero. For him, Christians were a convenient scapegoat. When a great fire devastated Rome in 64 AD, Nero blamed the Christians. He entertained Romans with public crucifixions of Christians. Long after Nero's death, the persecution continued. As a leading Christian, the writer John was also victimized by one of Nero's successors, the Emperor Domitian. John says he was condemned to exile off the coast of Turkey, on a small island of just 13 square miles.
The island of Patmos is a very rugged terrain, and you can see a sense of desolation there.
In this dark hour, John pens a revelation of hope to his fellow Christians. 22 short chapters, but an epic apocalypse. John writes Christ will return and destroy the persecutors.
John's intention is to depict not only the end of time, but perhaps more importantly, the destruction of the Roman Empire. If you're living in a community which is experiencing persecution, the destruction of the Roman Empire is an incredibly hopeful thing.
Typically, apocalyptic texts were written at times of difficulty. when people were going through hard times and were looking for some hope. So these texts are filled with messages of hope, how to cope with the difficulties of the present day, and how to see that God has better plans for the future.
Some who read Revelation as prophecy believe hardship will precede salvation. The salvation of the rapture.
The idea of the rapture has gained its popularity with this movement that history is going downhill and will continue to go downhill until the return of Jesus.
Adherents of the rapture say it comes straight out of the book of Revelation. Most scholars disagree.
The rapture is a very important feature of fundamentalist thinking. It doesn't have anything to do with the book of Revelation. It's pieced together different elements from different parts of the Bible that is then taught as though it comes from the book of Revelation.
Bell says to be or not.
In fact, the word rapture appears nowhere in the Bible. Literal believers say the rapture precedes the terror of the tribulation. And there was a great earthquake, such as was not seen since men were upon the earth. So mighty an earthquake, and so great. Revelation chapter 16, verse 18. The gigantic quake that rocked South Asia in 2004 generated a monster tidal wave that killed more than 270,000 people. The deadliest tsunami on record. Some believe the quake was a precursor to greater disasters to come. Believers also say Revelation predicts a global catastrophe from a heavenly body. And there fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp, and it fell upon the third of rivers and the fountain of waters, and many men died. Revelation chapter 8, verse 10 to 11. To support their scenario, believers seek evidence in not only scripture, but science. Although large-scale asteroid strikes are rare, believers say a huge asteroid may be destined for Earth. Recent publicity of cosmic near misses convinces many believers that the tribulation is around the corner. And these terrible times of the tribulation are symbolized by four of the most infamous characters in the Bible. The four horsemen of the apocalypse. And I saw, and behold, a white horse, and he that sat on him had a bow, and a crown was given unto him, and he went forth, conquering and to conquer. Revelation chapter 6, verse 2. The white horseman stands for conquest. The red horseman stands for war. The black horseman carries a scale that stands for economic collapse, famine, and hunger. The last horseman is the most feared. And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed with him. Revelation chapter 6, verse 8. Believers say the arrival of the four horsemen will signal the beginning of the end. The chaos and destruction of the 7 years of tribulation.
And over half of the Earth's population will die through events that will take place during the 7-year period.
Most scholars say, relax. John wasn't describing a future apocalypse, but a clear and present danger. A feared empire to the east of Rome. The Parthians.
At the end of the first century, any Roman who would read through the book of Revelation would understand that the four horsemen sound like the Parthians galloping against the Roman legions. And they feared the Parthians, in particular, the Parthians on their white horses with their bows and arrows. That would be the image that would resonate with them.
In this apocalypse scenario, the four horsemen paved the way for the darkest figure of all. The Bible calls him the Beast. Adherents of this apocalypse scenario call him the Antichrist. They believe he will lead mankind to a final battle. Armageddon. If the Antichrist appeared on Earth, would you recognize him? The Antichrist will appear as a devil in disguise, or so say believers.
This is going to be the most popular person the world has ever seen. I mean, the guy is going to be a rock star.
Believers in the apocalypse scenario say the Antichrist will one day rule the world and cause suffering never seen before. His true identity will at last be known too late.
And it's unlikely we'll know who he is at first. I doubt he knows who he is, but I believe he's alive today. This is a guy who's got he's got 6,000 years of human history tucked in his head through the inspiration of Satan.
The notion of an Antichrist appears throughout the Bible. In 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, Paul describes him as the son of perdition. And the 24th chapter of Matthew refers to false Christ and false prophets. Yet in the book of Revelation, the term Antichrist never appears. Instead, John names him the Beast. And I saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. Revelation chapter 13, verse 1. Ever since Revelation described the beast, believers have struggled to identify him. In the 13th century, Pope Innocent III named the prophet Muhammad the Antichrist. During the Protestant Reformation, Martin Luther called the Pope the Antichrist. The Pope responded by claiming that Luther was the child of Satan. Many dictators from Napoleon to Hitler have been nominated.
The idea of the Antichrist has caught hold in the imagination of a lot of people, and it's been reduced to a single, very evil person who will lead the world under a one-world order.
In Revelation, John leaves a clue to his true identity. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. Revelation chapter 13, verse 18. 666. To decode its meaning, some scholars have turned to gematria, an ancient Hebrew practice akin to numerology. The Hebrew alphabet has 22 letters, and each letter has a numeric equivalent.
And it turns out that by gematria, which is number symbolism, we can figure out who 666 was.
When biblical historians apply gematria to famous first-century figures, they come up with an exact match for 666.
666 was Nero Caesar, Caesar Nero, the emperor.
Translate the name Caesar Nero from Greek to Hebrew, and the numbers for each letter add up to 666.
He was actually called the Beast by some of his contemporaries, mainly because he was such a bad guy. He was notorious for persecuting Christians, for killing Christians who wouldn't bow to him.
Nero committed suicide before John wrote his Revelation, but his reputation lived on. To some scholars, 666 is a coded message from a Christian exile.
What John is about in that context is an indictment of the Roman imperial cult. John says it cost human lives.
Some fundamentalist Christians disagree. To them, the Antichrist is alive, and he'll use his mark to control mankind. In their scenario, the apocalypse will bring chaos. To survive, each person must accept the mark of the beast, as Revelation predicts. He causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bound, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads. And that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. Revelation chapter 13, verse 16 to 17. In John's day, such marks weren't fantasy, but facts of life.
In ancient times, mark was used to identify individuals. It would be used for soldiers, for slaves.
Identification technology has come a long way since John's day.
It's very possible that biometrics or scan technology, chip implants will be used to enforce that mark.
If I were to pull your Social Security number, if there was some way that I could do that, you'd be socially dead. You couldn't, a bank account, couldn't get a job, couldn't do anything. This is precisely the way that the beast exercises his control, using the mark.
Seems to be the issue here. We got a problem. Hey.